Oops, there we go. Good evening and happy Chanukah to everyone. The name of tonight's class is, and a break in our regularly scheduled programming, we're not learning Tanya tonight. We are learning for Chanukah. Normally we don't have our class on Chanukah, so we'll learn about Chanukah tonight. The name of the class, as I have declared it, is Chanukah Makes No Sense. That's the name of the class. Now normally, that's not how we learn things in Chassidus. Normally we don't say things make no sense, right? Normally when we learn Chassidus, we say, Tzarich lahavin, we need to understand, right? It's very arrogant to say things don't make sense, but I think you'll agree with me. By the end of the shir, I'm going to bring you over to my side that Chanukah doesn't make any sense. We'll see. So, the brief story of Chanukah, for those who don't know, for those who haven't reviewed it yet this year, right, the basic story of Chanukah, l'chaim. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, right? That's the basic story. But every holiday, the general story of Chanukah, as you may or may not know, is that essentially, in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, after the split up of Alexander the Great's Greek Empire into three parts. There was a Greek part, an Egyptian part, and an Assyrian part, or what's known as the Seleucid Empire, if you want to be technically correct. The land of Israel, where all the Jews lived, fell under the Assyrian remains of the Greek Empire. They were under the Seleucid Empire. And the Greeks, generally speaking, were very culturally tolerant of the Jews, as a rule. They said that the Jews can practice their Torah and they can practice their mitzvahs. It doesn't really bother us. They're very open-minded. The Greeks are very culturally pluralistic. It's not really a problem. There were many Jews who began to become Hellenized and begin to go over to the Greek way of things. They begin to worship idols. They begin to study Greek teachings, Greek philosophy, and become more and more culturally Greek. And there's a lot of tension in the land of Israel. But the tension does not boil over until Antiochus comes to power. Antiochus the fourth of Syria, the emperor of the Seleucid Empire, he comes to power and he is not such a nice, tolerant guy. He outlaws important mitzvahs, things like bris milah and the study of Torah, and he sets up a huge idol to Zeus in the Beis HaMikdash, right? And he starts killing people who won't bow down to idols, right? Like the famous story of Hannah and her 7 sons. Please, we need to save the questions till the end because we really, or comments even more till the end. Questions for sure. Questions maybe till the end. Comments definitely. Antiochus's assaults against the Jewish people grow worse and worse, and his crimes go worse and worse, until, of course, he comes to the village of Modi'in, where he tries to have a respected old priest named Matisyahu offer a sacrifice to pagan gods, and Matisyahu declines, but another Jew agrees, and then Matisyahu takes a sword from one of the Greek soldiers, and he kills the idol worshiper, and he kills the Greeks, and him and his sons drive the Greeks from the town, and that's how the famous rebellion of the Maccabees begins against the Greeks. And fundamentally the Maccabees hide in the various caves and hills of Judea, and they wage guerrilla warfare against the Greeks. And eventually the Maccabees, despite being an incredibly numerically inferior force, especially since most of the Jews are not on their side, right? Most of the Jews are indifferent or Greek, right? It's a small minority of the Jews who fight with the Maccabees. Eventually the Maccabees succeed in their battle. They drive the Greeks from Jerusalem. That very day, which was, according to most opinions, the 24th of Kislev, they go up to the Beis HaMikdash, and they find that everything has been, they remove the statues of the idols and all the idolatrous things. They find that the menorah has been stolen The golden menorah has been stolen from the Beis HaMikdash, so they craft a new menorah, a temporary one, until they can make one properly, and they go in search of oil for lighting the menorah that night. They find that the Greeks have tampered with almost all the oil in the temple, except for the one jar that still has the seal of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. They take that oil, they put it in the menorah, they light it, and the menorah, even though there's only enough oil for one day, the oil lasts for 8 days. And in commemoration of this miracle, we have the holiday of Chanukah. That should sound pretty standard. That's the story, right? It sounds nice, a nice story, but I object because the whole thing makes no sense at all. None. No sense. I'm glad you agree. I have at least 10 ways that the entire story doesn't make sense. The whole story of Chanukah doesn't make sense, right? So we'll take them in order. The first thing about Chanukah that doesn't make sense, and when I say it doesn't make sense, right, I don't mean it doesn't make sense according to what you would think is the right thing. I mean it doesn't make sense according to Torah. According to Torah law, according to the way the Torah sees the world, the holiday of Chanukah doesn't make sense. How so? First of all, there is a general question as to whether the Maccabees were even allowed to wage war against the Greeks. Because as we know, there are only 3 mitzvahs for which you are supposed to die rather than transgress them, right? Which are illicit relations, murder, and the worship of idols, right? And you're only allowed to die for rather than perform those transgressions if this is an actual apparently, if this is only an actual thing that is going to happen to you right now. In other words, someone has a gun to your head and they say, go murder someone else, or I kill you, you're supposed to let yourself be killed. But once Matisyahu kills the idol worshiper, and he's not in danger of serving idols, and his sons are not in danger of serving idols, and they're all hiding in the hills of Jerusalem, they're hiding in the Judean caves, and Antiochus doesn't know where they are, right? And they can live a Jewish life where they're hiding. They can live a Jewish life in their small area that they're created. Who says they're allowed to go and now leave the caves and wage war against Antiochus and kill his soldiers and put their own lives and the lives of other Jews in danger? Right? And risk not being able to fulfill those mitzvahs in their own place that they've been removed to, right? Once they're safe, once they're free to worship God, there is no gun at their head, how are they even allowed to go and wage war? Is a real halachic question. How are they allowed to go and put their lives in danger even to fight the Greeks? That's the first thing that doesn't make sense. Next, we have, with regards to the oil of Chanukah. There's several things that don't make sense. There's several halachic difficulties in Jewish law with the way the Chanukah story goes. The first difficulty is that we have a general principle in Jewish law that impurity, tumah, is permitted for communal needs in the Beis HaMikdash. There is a general rule. If you have a sacrifice that has a prescribed time and is offered on behalf of the entire congregation, even though it's meant to be tahor, even though it's meant to be ritually pure, if it is ritually impure, you are still permitted to offer it. The ritually impure, if there is no other option, and this is all you have, you are permitted to use the ritually impure for communal needs. And the lighting of the menorah, even though it's done by one kohen, is a communal need. It's for the entire Jewish people that the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash is lit. So it's in general a question why it is that they even have to have the miracle of Chanukah, right? Because they have many, many jugs of impure oil and only one jug of pure oil. But it would seem, according to the basic halachic understanding, and there's all of these questions have answers, which is something we'll discuss a little bit later, but according to the basic halachic opinion, it would seem that they could put in the pure oil, and in the second day they could put in the impure oil. In other words, it's not so terrible. It's not like they would be transgressing a terrible transgression, right? There's a general rule that the impure oil would be permissible. Why do they even feel the need to search for pure oil so desperately in the first place, right? Is in general a question. It would be permitted to use the impure oil. Then you have another question, which is even further, that a suffix tuma, a doubt of impurity, because you can't obviously, purity and impurity is not something that you see with your eyes, right? We know that something is impure because of something that we witnessed. Like if we saw that there was a dead body in the house, right, we would know that the things within it are ritually impure. But the Jews did not have access to the Beis HaMikdash when the Greeks were in charge of it, right? They knew that the seals of the Kohen Gadol were broken, but they didn't know for sure that all of the jars of oil in the Beis HaMikdash were impure. And a suffix tuma, a doubt of impurity, if it's found in the public domain, the Reshus HaRabim, which it's a question of where they found the oil. If it was found in the public domain, a doubt of whether the oil is impurity, we say we're lenient and we say you can treat it as if it's pure. We don't say you can assume it's impure if it's found in the public domain. So this makes it even more of a question, right? They didn't even know for sure that the oil was impure, right? Never mind that the impure oil is permitted to use. They don't even know whether the oil itself is impure, right? And that's before you even get to the next issue, which is that there's an opinion in the Gemara, depending how you read it, right, which says that liquids that are used for in the Beis HaMikdash are always pure. They cannot be impurified. The liquids that are used in the Beis HaMikdash, it says in Edius, right? In other words, there's such a halachic opinion. Couldn't the Maccabees rely on that opinion in Jewish law? In other words, why are they so certain that they have to go and find the pure oil? It's possible that the oil can't even become impure in the first place, like Beinyan. Never mind, they're not sure it became impure. Fundamentally, there's an idea that the oil might not even be impurifiable, right? There's no potential for impurity even. And that's before you even get to the fact that the Maccabees themselves, right, were at that time impure. Right? What's the story? They come directly from their military victory on the 24th of Kislev, and they come to the Beis HaMikdash, and now they're searching for oil. You know that if the Kohen touches the oil with his finger, the oil will itself become impure, because they've been around dead bodies all day. They're not ready to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. But Kedusha v'Tara, right? In other words, even if they find pure oil, they will have to go to extraordinary measures not to impurify it, right? Because any vessel they touch, right, any means by which they would normally light the menorah, right, is conducts their impurity and makes the oil itself impure. So what's even the point of searching for pure oil if you yourself are going to impurify it if you touch it, right? They would have to light it in a way, they would have to find something that could hold oil that wasn't a vessel and therefore couldn't become impure, and use that to light the oil that's to get the oil in the menorah and light it, right? Even further, we say the menorah was stolen, right? The menorah was stolen. They didn't have menorah. They had to make a menorah. But the question is, what kind of menorah can they make, right? Because a metal menorah receives impurity. Any metal menorah they made would become as impure as they themselves are, right? What about a wooden menorah, right? Because wood doesn't normally receive impurity unless it's made into a vessel, as we know from the laws of Sukkos, right? Which is why the schach has to be wood that's cut from a tree that's never been made into a vessel or used for any purpose before, right? Once you use the wood for a purpose, make it into a vessel, you can't take like a chair and cut it into pieces and use it as schach, right? Because it can receive impurity. So making the wood into a menorah would itself make it be able to receive impurity. The only halachic solution is they would have to make a wooden menorah, which again, you're setting it on fire, right? A wooden menorah. And the wooden menorah would have to be attached to the ground of the Beis HaMikdash, because things which are attached to the ground are considered as a building, not as a vessel, and only then they're not able to receive tumah. So on that day, halachically, the Maccabees would have gone to such a length, despite all the previous mentioned doubts, right? They would have gone to such a length to make a menorah and be able to light it with pure oil that didn't become impure, that they would have to fashion a wooden menorah A wooden menorah that they then had to somehow attach and fasten to the very stones of the Beis Hamikdash, the floor of the temple in the correct place. And that's the length they went to for the doubt of a doubt of a doubt that they should be able to get the purified oil in the menorah. And none of this is necessary because they were probably allowed to use impure oil anyway. Right? You tell me if this holiday makes sense, okay? Even a further question. The whole question of whether the Greeks can defile the oil in the first place is a huge halachic quandary. It's a real issue. It has rabbis through the generations scratching their heads because non-Jews do not fundamentally have a law of pure and impure. The whole distinction between tuma and tara, between pure and impure, is really only a distinction that applies to Jews. We assume that non-Jews have a certain state of impurity because of a takana, because of a rabbinic decree that was made, that we assume that everyone has a status of zav or zava, that they have an impure emission from their body, and therefore they are considered impure. But who established that rabbinic rule? The schools of Shammai and Hillel that existed hundreds of years after the story of the Maccabees. So that rule was not yet, seemingly, unless there was another rule that was just like it, but earlier, that rule was not yet in effect. So the question is, if Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel haven't declared that we assume all non-Jews are impure, why would the Maccabees assume that the Greeks impurified the oil by touching it? The Greeks, non-Jews, generally speaking, have no status of spiritual impurity. What do you mean they impurified it, right? Another proposed solution to this issue of how the Greeks could have impurified the oil, which is if you think of the right there, so you have the takana of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which is from centuries after, right? You have a different explanation that you could use, which I believe. You have a different explanation, which the Gemara gives in a different place, in a different situation, but you could apply here, that the non-Jewish armies would always travel with sorcerers that would try and help them succeed in battle, and there was no army that didn't carry around what were called actual scalps. They would use scalps in their witchcraft, human scalps, which come from corpses, which are therefore impure, and so you could assume that the Greek army, when they conquered the Beis Hamikdash, they specifically had the ones with them that had the scalps with them, so that when it was brought into the Beis Hamikdash worked as an ohel, as a building that conducts impurity, and made all the oils impure. That's one way you could explain this. I'm just trying to give you a feel for how the different various halachic ways of actually trying to make the oil even impure, to make it even make sense, right? And then we arrive at the central issue. We arrive at the central question, of trying to make sense of Chanukah. The central question is called the question of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. What many don't know is that before he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch is really based on an earlier work by Rav Yosef Karo called the Beis Yosef, which is a commentary on the Torah, which you may have heard of. And that is his commentary where he goes through all the sources for everything that he's going to say in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't have sources, right? And in the Beis Yosef, he asks a famous question. The question is, why is Chanukah 8 days long? It doesn't make any sense because on the first day they had enough oil. They had enough oil for 1 day. So the miracle was really only for 7 days. The holiday should be 7 days long. This is known as the question of the Beis Yosef. The question of the Beis Yosef has many, many, many answers in the rabbinic texts. Over 100, more than 100, probably hundreds, if you actually went through and made notes of it. Everyone has a different answer, and they get, as you go through time, they get more and more creative answers to the question. You know, I think. It was the painter Matisse who said that the hardest thing in the world to paint is a rose, right? Because everyone paints a rose, right? You have to forget everyone else's painting of a rose so you can paint a rose. So it's the same thing with the Lahavdil, with the Beis Yosef's question, right? So everyone has an answer, so it's for you to come up with an original answer, right, is actually a great test of your rabbinic ingenuity, your creativity, right? So let's go through some of the answers to this question. They're fascinating, some fascinating things here. We're going to go through first the answers that are not related to the actual miracle of the oil, because there's some answers which are about how the oil burned, which we'll put in a separate category for the moment. So we have answers. Remember, the question is, why is the holiday 8 days long? Right? It should be 7, because the miracle of the oil seemingly was only for 7 days. There was no miracle on the first night. On the first night, it was natural. They had enough oil for the first night. Yes?
Not necessarily.
Right, so, well, that's 1 second. I have 9 answers to this question before we even get to the answers of how the menorah burns. Let's go through some of them. Why is the holiday 8 days? One answer is that the first day of Chanukah is not for the miracle of the oil. The first day of Chanukah is for the miracle of the war victory. Right? The first day is because they recaptured Jerusalem from a numerically superior army. That itself is enough of a miracle. So the miracle of the oil is the other 7 days. The first day is for the miracle of the army. Simple and beautiful. Rav Kook has a second answer. Rav Kook's answer is very different, from a totally different angle. Rav Kook says that if the holiday was only 7 days, then our menorahs that we light now in commemoration of the miracle of the Beis HaMikdash would be 7 branches. And the 7 branches of our menorah would be just like the 7 branches of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash itself. And you're not allowed to imitate vessels of the Beis HaMikdash especially now since the Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed, you're not allowed to imitate or make copies of the vessels in the Beis HaMikdash. So if the holiday were only 7 days, right, then everybody, when they light their menorah, would be actually transgressing by using an imitation of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. So instead, we made the holiday 8 days, so we're not imitating, right? It's a clever answer, if I do say so myself. Others get even more creative. They say, and don't ask questions, because I know all the obvious questions on this answer. In other words, there's a reason why these answers are not, why you haven't heard of them yet, right? If any one of them was perfect, you would have heard of it already, right? The one opinion says that the reason we keep 8 days of Chanukah is Sfeika de Yoma, the doubt of what day it's on, just like Yom Tov Sheni outside of Eretz Yisrael, right? Outside of Eretz Yisrael, we keep 2 days of Yom Tov at the beginning of Pesach, for example. So too, Chanukah, because of the doubt of what day it was on, there became a custom of having an extra day, 8 days of Chanukah. So I'll let that sink in for a moment before, that's a different proposed answer. If you thought that was creative, wait till you hear this answer, why Chanukah is 8 days. Chanukah, one of the reasons why the holiday is named Chanukah, it's mysterious why the holiday is named Chanukah, not explained anywhere. It's also a question many people have opinions on. I should just let you know, right? The 2 most common explanations is that, Chanukah's on Mizbeach, right? The reestablishment of the altar in the Beis HaMikdash, obviously. You have Chanu Chaf He, which is that we were freed from our enemies on Chaf He, on the 25th of Kislev. There's another explanation for the name Chanukah, but there's another explanation. There's a third explanation, which helps answer this question of the Beis Yosef, why is Chanukah 8 days? And that answer is that Chanukah is a Reisha Tevus, an acronym for Ches Neirus v'Halacha Kebeis Hillel. Right? As we know, there's a famous disagreement in the Gemara about how you light the menorah, Mahadran min Mahadran, right? How do you light the menorah in the best way? Beis Hillel says that you do it the way we do it now, 1 candle on the first night, 2 on the second, 3rd on the third. Beis Shammai says the opposite. The first night we should light 8 candles, the second night 7, the third night 6. Right, and we know the halacha is like Beis Hillel. We do it like we do it now, in ascending order. So the very name Chanukah is a mnemonic of the opinion that we follow on this day. Ches Neirus, 8 candles. The halacha kebeis Hillel, and the law is like the house of Hillel. That's the first letters of those words spells Chanukah. 8 candles in the law is like Beis Hillel, and this itself explains why Chanukah is 8 days. right? Get ready for this. There have to be 8 days. Because if Chanukah was 7 days, then on the 4th night of Chanukah, which was last night, both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai would light 4 candles. Right? So he's arguing, it's a good one, it's creative, no? So only if you have 8 days, right, will we see every night that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Every night there's a difference between the number of candles you light, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's one answer from a sefer called Merva Eilos. Is one answer. Crazy. Then there's a different opinion, which is like what Eyal said before, that the She'iltus. Who hasn't heard of the She'iltus? The She'iltus of Rabbi Chai Gaon, the first halachic sefer really written after the codification of the Gemara. It's basically the oldest post-Gemara sefer in Judaism, is the She'iltus of Rabbi Chai Gaon. And there, when he talks about the story of Chanukah, one of the times he speaks about it exactly as it is in the Gemara Shabbos, which is the story as everyone knows it.
Chai Gaon or Hai Gaon?
Achai, different Gaon, 2 different Gaonim. One is Hai Gaon and one is Achai Gaon. Hai Gaon was later, I believe. Achai Gaon was, I think, the earliest, if I'm not mistaken, the earliest of the Gaonim. Where was I? Yes, he talks about the Chanukah story twice. One time when he quotes the Braisa, he quotes it just like it is in our Girsa, in our version of the Gemara. The other time he quotes the Braisa, and it's very significant, right, because it's a very early sefer. In other words, Rav Chai Gaon is immediately after the sources that the Gemara is using, right? It's not a big difference in time. He has almost the same authority as the Gemara itself, right? And a different time when he quotes the Braisa, he says, where it says that there was enough oil to last for 8 days, in his version of the Braisa, according to some opinions of how to read it, right? Don't ask. It says there was almost enough oil for 1 day. So that means that it was a miracle that the whole first night there was enough. So the whole question is solved before it even starts, right? The whole question only starts because of our version of the Braisa. But if you follow Rav Chai Gaon's version of the Braisa, right, then there's a miracle every night, because even the first night there wasn't completely enough.
But how can it be? If it was sealed, then it was supposed to be for 1 day, unless somebody, didn't fill it the way it should be.
Like I said, there's a reason these answers aren't all famous. There's a reason you haven't heard of this before. There's questions on all of these. It's a good point. There's a different answer which says that the first day was for the discovery of the jar of oil, right? Another very simple and smooth, one of the better, simpler answers to understand, right? 7 days was for the burning. The first day, the miracle is that they even found the jar of oil, because the Greeks, obviously, if all of them were tampered with, the Greeks were obviously seeking to tamper with all of them. The fact that the Greeks even missed one, and then they found one, right? The appearance of this jar of oil is itself miraculous to them. So they made it an 8-day holiday, is another answer. Another answer, which is beautiful, more, more homilet, more poetical in a sense, more poetical answer. But one opinion says the reason why Chanukah is 8 days is because once the Greeks were defeated, they could reinstitute the mitzvah of bris milah, which had been banned, which is on the 8th day. Right, so Chanukah is 8 days long in commemoration of the reestablishment of the mitzvah of bris, which had been banned, right, under Antiochus. And there's another answer which says, this is a nice one, this may appeal to some of you, says that miracles in general teach us that even nature is miraculous. Even nature is an act of God, right? So if we're going to have the other 7 days, and we're going to learn that God has total dominion over nature by choosing how long this oil will burn for, then after the holidays passed, we'll see that even the natural oil is God deciding all the time how much it should burn, right? So in other words, we learn from the last 7 days that even the first day is like a miracle, because it's God acting even in nature. Right? Nice answer. And then you have another nice answer, which is that the last of the ones that I've written here anyway, although as I said there are many more, that the miracle of the first day of Chanukah is that the Jews had the faith to even light the pure oil. Right? That the fact that the Jews did not despair of having enough oil and actually went ahead and burned enough for 1 day, right? That they had that sort of positive attitude. That itself is like a miracle from the first day of the holiday. So that's what the first day celebrates. The other 7 days celebrate the miracle of the oil. Those are all answers. None of those explanations explain what actually happened in the case of the miracle of the oil. The answers the Beis Yosef himself give all have to do with the way the miracle of the oil worked. That the miracle of the oil happened in such a way that it was a miracle every night. Not just on the last 7, but on all 8 nights. But the thing is, the reason why I've separated them into their own section is because once you examine each of these closely, you'll see that this part of Chanukah also doesn't make any sense. This also is totally beyond understanding. Why? Why is it beyond understanding? There's 2 general categories of explanations of how the miracle of the oil took place. There's 2 general categories. The categories are qualitative and quantitative, or as we would say in Hebrew, echus v'kamus, right? The quality of the oil was the miracle, or the amount of the oil was the miracle, right? Let's go through them in turn. The qualitative answer says like this. They had oil, and they put the oil in the menorah in one of 2 ways. Either they put all the oil in it first, and then they set it alight on that first night, on the 25th of Kislev, right? Or they took the amount of oil they had that was enough for 1 day, and they divided it into eighths. And they put an eighth of the oil in on the first night, an eighth of the oil in on the second night, etc. Right? And the miracle was that God makes that the oil should burn with much longer. It should have much more capacity for combustion, so to speak, to survive combustion. Is the opposite, right? It was inflammable. The oil had a much higher inflammable capacity. The fire burned less, right? So that the oil lasted for a long time. So either putting it all in on the first night or dividing it into eighths. Right? So there's a miracle that God makes that the oil has a quality that it burns much slower. If this is the explanation of the Chanukah miracle, right? And therefore there's a miracle every night, right? Therefore there's a miracle every night, because on the first night, from the first night, exactly. So that's an attempt to answer the question, right? The problems are many and extensive with this explanation of what the miracle is. First of all, you have the general issue of if this was a miracle, why would this even be a miracle worthy of a holiday, right? To us, this seems an incredible miracle. And it's an incredible miracle to whoever it happens to. But we have similar miracles recorded in the Tanakh, for example, for which there is no holiday. For example, we know that the Shabbos candles of Sarah and Rivka, our foremothers, right, who we're reading about now in Sefer Bereshit, we've just finished reading about, right, their Shabbos candles would last the whole week, right? They would light them on Erev Shabbos, and they would last till the next Erev Shabbos, it says, right? Seemingly in a similar sense, right? The oil would burn so slowly it would stay lit until the next Shabbos, which was a miracle, right? For that miracle, there's no holiday. For that miracle, there's no holiday. In other words, if God favors the Jewish people and does these things to them, that's very nice and it's very miraculous. There are many miracles for which there's no holiday. What's so special about Chanukah is the first question. But then, once you get into the details, there's even more questions. It's even more perplexing because either way you look at it, there's issues, right? If they divide it into eighths, this is a classic question on the Beis Yosef already. This is a question that was asked. As soon as the Beis Yosef wrote it, someone brought it up, right? And this is an original issue with the answer of the Beis Yosef, which is that if you're dividing it into eighths, first of all, you're relying on a miracle to happen, which you're not really supposed to do, by dividing it into eighths. And second of all, you're not fulfilling tein la midasa, that you're supposed to put in enough oil that it should last. You wouldn't be fulfilling that on the first night, right? There's two dinim. There's 2 laws. The first law is that the vessel that you use to fill the menorah with is supposed to be full. When you use it to fill the menorah, right? You're supposed to fill up. There's a certain measure, right? There's a whole room in the Beis Hamikdash full of different measuring vessels, right? And the whole thing is you're supposed to fill the measuring vessel exactly, is the whole idea, because everything in the Beis Hamikdash is associated with perfection, right? So you fill up that vessel to full, and then you take that vessel and you fill the menorah with it. right? So if they divided into eighths, they wouldn't be doing that on the first night. There's also another idea, which is that you're supposed to fill the menorah with the right amount of oil that it should burn the whole night, right? Or the whole 24 hours, depending on which opinion you follow of whether the menorah was meant to burn just for the night or for the whole 24 hours, different story, but whatever it was, right? You have to fill up enough that it should burn. So there's that the vessel should be full of oil is one thing, right? Which is a volume measure, right? There should be a certain volume measure of oil. Then there's a second thing, that oil should be enough to burn the whole night. These are two laws associated with the menorah, right? So if they divide it into eighths, the vessel is certainly not full. So already from the first night, right, they're breaking one of the laws of filling the menorah. Right? So what if they put it all in? That's filling it up in eighths, right? Dividing it into 8 parts. So what if they pour it all in? Right? They pour it all in on the first night. From the second night, either way you look at it, you have an issue, right? If you're following the idea that the vessels have to be full, then from the second night the menorah is already not the menorah is not full. Right, that's obvious. From the second night, once the eighth of the oil has burned down, then from the second night it's not full. Right, so you've solved the issue on the first night by putting in all the menorah, but now on the second night it's not full. And if you want to say that we're following the opinion that it's enough to burn the whole night, that's where you can get clever, because after the first night they would have realized that I only need an eighth of the oil to burn the whole night. Right. Then the problem becomes, if you are clever and you realize that, the problem becomes you now actually have too much oil in the menorah. Right. You have too much oil. You're putting in all of the oil, and now it's too much for each night, right? You have 7 times as much or 6 times as much oil as you actually need.
If the menorah has to light only during daytime, actually they will have to turn the light off.
No, well the idea is, right, I forgot to mention that. I should have mentioned that. Good point, I should have mentioned that. The whole idea is that it would miraculously burn out when it came time to light it again. That's part of the whole idea. I should have mentioned that. And you can't say that these laws of filling the menorah are laws the Maccabees wouldn't have minded breaking, because I just spent 30 minutes explaining to you that the Maccabees minded breaking the most distant doubt of a doubt, right? They still wanted to fill it with pure oil. In other words, they wanted to fulfill the mitzvah to the absolute perfection, even though they was permitted to use the impure, and even though you're not sure it's impure, and even though you probably can't even make it impure, right? They wanted to use the pure. So you can't say that they wouldn't have minded that the vessel wasn't full, or that that you have too much oil in the menorah. They wanted to fulfill it to perfection. So the question becomes, so it's hard to see how under this understanding that the oil burns slow, we have solved why Chanukah is 8 days, but we haven't explained how the Maccabees would have been happy to light the menorah in this fashion, right? So let's go to the other answer, the other category of answers, which is quantitative. Don't say that the oil miraculously burned slower. The oil burned at regular speed. Right? Say that what happened is there was magically regenerating oil, right? Either in the jug, right, that they take the jug and they pour and fill the menorah, and then the jug instantly refills with oil. The jug is not empty, right? Or that they put the oil in the menorah, the jug is empty, the oil burns down, and then when they come back to relight it the next day, the menorah is full again, right? It doesn't refill in the jug, it refills in the menorah, right? This is quantitative, right? The miracle is there's more oil now. There's more oil than there naturally would be. That way the oil can burn at its natural speed. The menorah would be full of oil, the vessel and the menorah every day. Right? In other words, you'd be fulfilling all those obligations. So it has those advantages. However, what we gain in advantages, we lose. First of all, you have the same question of why Chanukah is a holiday, because we have in the Tanakh, again, the same miracle for which there's no holiday, which was the miracle of Elisha, who very famously told the widow to take the little jar of oil she had and fill all the vessels in her house from it, right? And the oil just kept pouring, right? Same miracle, no holiday for that, right? Second of all, you have the general issue that this doesn't actually explain why Chanukah is 8 days long, right? You have no problem on the first day. On the first day, there's a miracle of oil reappearing. You have a problem on the 8th day. On the 8th day, you use the oil that has come in from before. You refill it, you burn it. There is no miracle on the 8th day. So what you gain at the beginning of Chanukah, you lose at the end of Chanukah. Chanukah should still be 7 days. The miracle was only the first 7 days, but not on the last day, right? And even more of a klutz kasha, as famously asked by Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, a very famous question on this explanation, is that the law of the menorah this is going to sound radical to you, is that you have to burn olive oil in the menorah. You have to burn olive oil in the menorah. You can't burn miracle oil in the menorah. Right? This oil, where did this oil come from? This isn't olive oil. What's olive oil to a human being? Olive oil to a human being. Olive oil in the way halakha says it, right? You can't find a random jug of oil, halachically, and say, well, it looks like olive oil, tastes like olive oil, may as well put it in the menorah.
The seal. It has the seal.
No, the first time, but then where does it come from? No. The menorah you use the first time, yes, but then all of a sudden the jug's refilled, or the menorah is refilled of oil. Oil from where? That's not oil that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. This is miracle oil. You can't light the menorah with miracle oil. Olive oil. Nothing makes it olive oil. It didn't come from an olive. You don't know that it came from an olive. You can't find what? But you don't know is the point. You can't just light it with random things. You have to light it with olive oil. How did they know in the regular operation of the Beis Hamikdash that they lit the menorah with olive oil? Because they went to an olive orchard and they got the olives and they squeezed it into, right? That's how you got your olive oil, right? And we know it took a week for the regular olive oil to be prepared, which is why they didn't have any for Chanukah, right? So the whole thing is that this oil from the second day, if you have miracle oil, you can't burn miracle oil in the menorah. Where in halacha does it say if you find oil that looks like olive oil and smells like olive oil, you're allowed to burn it in the menorah? There's no such thing. You're only allowed to burn olive oil. It's a brilliant question. A klutz kasha, as they call it. A klutz kasha in Yiddish. A klutz is like a block of wood, right? It's called a klutz kasha because it's so obvious, right? It's so obvious that it takes a genius to think of it, right? It's the sort of thing that it's so clear and so obvious that most people will never see it ever, right? So it's miracle oil. It's not olive oil from an olive. It's miracle oil from heaven, right? So you have to say it's miracle oil with olive oil-like qualities. Maybe if it has qualities like an olive oil, I can burn it. I don't know. It's an interesting question. So all of the explanations for what actually happened at the miracle, right? That's the question. What actually happened? If it was the oil burning slowly, then you have all of the issues with the vessels being full and the right amount of oil. And if it was miracle oil, it's not even oil, right? Not to mention that it doesn't explain why the holiday is 8 days, right? So even that doesn't make sense. What even happened at the miracle of Chanukah, right? So, as I've been saying over and over again, the idea is that Chanukah does not make sense. But I don't mean it in the way that Chanukah doesn't make sense because we can't answer any of the questions. The answer to the questions is that Chanukah doesn't make any sense. Right? The answer to the questions is that Chanukah doesn't make any sense, right? Which is another way of saying that Chanukah, the holiday of Chanukah, the miracle of Chanukah, is beyond regular human understanding. It is something that is beyond intellect and rationality. It transcends human intellect. What actually happened in the Beis Hamikdash? What happened is like this. They took the oil and they poured in all the oil, just like we were saying before, right? They set it on fire, but it's not that it burned very slowly. They set it on fire and it was not consumed. They set it on fire and it was not burned. The fire did not consume the oil. This is a unique miracle. This is something that there's no example of. The only thing that sounds similar to this is the miracle of the burning bush. And the miracle of the burning bush, it says that that God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from the fire that's miteichasna. There was a fire among or within the bush. It doesn't say that the bush in its natural state was actually burning. The burning bush is a misnomer if you want to be very technical, right? This is a unique example. Because how do we know that the oil was burning? Exactly as I just explained it to you. Because the Maccabees were sticklers for halacha. They wanted to do everything exactly as it's meant to be. They found their 100% natural olive oil, right? That is what they took, and they set it on fire. And it was on fire. The only thing is that it was also not on fire. It was on fire, but it wasn't consumed, which is another way of saying it's not on fire, right? Because fire is just another word for combustion, which means that the fuel is being consumed, right? So the oil was both on fire and not on fire.
As usual, what we study here.
It is like something that we have spoken here, which is that, very similar, the other thing it's similar to is the makam ha'aron ena min amida. The place of the ark is of no space, which we've discussed recently in this class, right? The whole idea was, and as I repeat very briefly, the whole idea was that you would measure from the sides of the room to the middle, and then you would measure the size of the aron, and you would see from the sides of the aron to the edges of the room, and you would see that the aron took up no space, right? What was the whole idea there, if you recall? The whole idea there was not that there's a miracle that the aron takes up no space. The whole idea was that specifically because there is no miracle, there is a miracle. Right? Specifically because there cannot be a miracle of the aron taking up no space, that is why there is one. Right? Because it's only the aron, which is built to exact specifications and put in that exact place at the exactly correct distance from the walls, right, that makes it that there is now a miracle that the aron takes up no space, right? And if it actually was that the aron took up no space, there would be no miracle and it would take up space. So it's because it takes up no space that it must take up space. Because it does take up space that it doesn't take up any space, right? In other words, it's a contradiction. It's not a miracle. It's a miracle and a non-miracle at once, right? It's not merely the breaking of the laws of nature. It is actually a logical contradiction. It both is and is not at the same time. The exact same thing is true of the miracle of Chanukah, that it must be that the fire is natural, because that was the whole purpose of what the Maccabees did. The whole reason the Maccabees sought out the one jar of oil is because they wanted to actually burn real pure olive oil in the menorah, and that's what they burned. But because that is what they burnt, it didn't burn, right? Specifically because that is what they chose to do. They chose to do it in the holiest way and burn the pure olive oil and not the impure oil. This oil actually did not burn. Right? If it actually did burn, then there would be less oil, and then the menorah wouldn't be full, and then they wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah in the best way as the Maccabees wished to, and then there would be no miracle. Right? The whole miracle is that there is no miracle. Right? Or the whole non-miracle is that there is a miracle, however you want to look at it. The natural order and miracle became one. The oil burned naturally, and only because it burned naturally, it didn't burn at all. The oil burned miraculously, but only because it was miraculous was there no miracle taking place whatsoever. Right? If you follow the logic. This lasted from the moment they lit it on the first day through all 8 days. So this is why Chanukah is 8 days long, in the simplest understanding. No, they lit it once every day, it would go out. And then they lit it again. And at the end of the 8th day, what happens? The oil vanishes. The oil vanishes, not consumed by the fire. There simply is no more oil, right? Because the whole idea is that the very natural existence of this oil is unnatural, right? The oil is natural and unnatural at the same time. The oil and its burning necessitate each other. So if the burning stops, there must not be any more oil. So there's no more oil. The moment the miracle stops on the 8th day, the oil simply ceases to be. Because the oil's very existence, right, is bound up with the fact that the oil does not exist, that the oil has already been consumed by the fire, right? Because this is natural oil, which is consumed by fire, right? So once the miracle is over, right, and the oil returns to its natural state, so to speak, right, the natural state of the oil is that it was burned 8 days ago. The oil ceases to exist. That's what happens in the miracle of the Beis HaMikdash. This, it turns out, answers all of our other questions that we asked. Why? Because this idea that the miracle, that the miraculous and the natural became one, right? That there was a not just nature and not just the transcendence of nature, but actually nature and miracle simultaneously in the same place. This is the essence of Chanukah. This is the essence of what Chanukah is, of who the Maccabees were, of the story of Chanukah, and of the celebration of Chanukah today. We see this in the difference between the 3 ways the miracle of the candles could have happened, right? If you want to say that it was quantitative, that there was new miracle oil in the menorah, right? What would have been the miracle? The miracle would have been that each day there was a miracle that there was new oil. For the rest of the day, the oil was completely natural. Right? In other words, there's a miracle at the beginning, but if someone walked into the Beis HaMikdash on the 5th day of Chanukah and saw the oil burning, they wouldn't even know that it was miraculous. There's nothing miraculous about it except for the fact that it exists, right? That the oil refilled from somewhere, under the first understanding of the miracle. Right? And then there's, if you want to say it was qualitative on the other hand, that the oil burned slowly, then you would have been able to see the miracle anytime you went into the Beis HaMikdash. But what of the miracle would you have seen? You would have seen only its effects. In other words, God transforms the nature of the oil at the beginning of the day, and now you see the effects of the miracle as the oil burns too slowly, unnaturally slowly. Right? But the actual miracle itself you wouldn't have witnessed, right? It's only under this idea that it burns but is not consumed, that it burns and does not burn at the same time, that you would have seen the miracle itself at every moment. Not just the effect, but the actual miracle, right? The actual miracle of God that God is implementing in this oil. Right? In fact, if in any way the miracle had been done earlier, it would become miraculous oil, and then this wouldn't be the nature of the miracle anymore. The whole nature of the explanation demands that the miracle is performed at every moment. Right? Within a human life, right, we have the same parallels. There's nature and miracle in the service of God. What are nature and miracle in a Jew's life, in the service of our Creator? Natural nature is that God is worshipped according to our understanding. God is worshipped according to reason, intellect, what makes sense to us and what pleases us, generally speaking. Generally speaking. In other words, we invest ourselves in every mitzvah and in every commandment of God exactly as much as that mitzvah deserves, right? So in other words, you have don't murder is a major mitzvah, and that is kept with a certain level of stringency, right? Tie your left shoe before your right shoe is a much lesser mitzvah, and that is filled with as much importance as we can understand it to have. Right? Which may be significant, but always according to our understanding of its importance. Always according to the way it sits with us, how important this seems to me. Right? At whatever level that may be, it could seem, if you learn a lot, it could seem very important. It could seem vital. Right? But it's always according to the level at which you understand it. Yes? To a tzaddik, obviously, a tzaddik would understand it to be incredibly important that you tie left before right. It could be a foundation of the whole universe. And they would be very careful with it, but it would be according to their understanding in this sense. Miracle within a person is the idea of Kabbalas Ol and Mesiras Nefesh. The idea, number one, of accepting the yoke of heaven, which means doing what God says because God says it, in the simplest understanding. And Mesiras Nefesh, which is the idea of self-sacrifice, that I am totally invested equally in everything that God wants. In other words, my understanding does not enter into the picture. I worship God and do what He says because He says it, with what amount of effort, with what amount of self-sacrifice? 100%. Everything that God says, absolutely equally. Tying my shoes and not killing the right way and not killing someone are exactly the same thing, because it's not about my understanding and my grasp of the mitzvah. So you have the nature of the person, which is the everything according to reason, everything according to what it demands. And then you have the miracle. Why is it the miracle? Because it transcends nature, right? Just like when God does a miracle, like at the splitting of the sea, for example, prototypical miracle. God does a miracle and He says that all of these systems, the systems of nature, the laws of nature, all of these things really only exist at my will, and they can just not exist at a moment's notice. It's just me here. Nature is not really real, right? Nature is just a one means of my expression. is what a miracle says. So too, in our service of God, we have the same idea, that it may appear that we do this mitzvah because we understand it more, this one because we do it less, but at the heart of a Jew, where a Jew has accepting the yoke, and he has total self-sacrifice, he has Kabbalas Olam Mesiras Nefesh, you really see that this natural order and this understanding is really just a means for my essence to express my performance of the mitzvahs. It's one way of doing them, but at essence, it's whatever God says, 100%. Yes? So you have the miracle and the nature within the human being. Now, the three ways the miracle of the menorah could have happened, right? It's all a combination. The two of them are a combination of nature. It's all a combination of nature and miracle, is the truth, right? So how do those combinations play out? If the miracle of the menorah, right, is quantitative, is that God makes new miracle oil, either in the jug or in the menorah, right? And we said the miracle is really only at the beginning of the day, but if you see the oil burning during the day, you would think it's completely natural, right? This is a person who at the beginning of the day, as it says in Shulchan Aruch, when a person reads Kriya Shema and Shacharis in the morning, they devote themselves 100% heart and soul to God, right? I love God with all my heart, with all my soul, and all my might, right? Right? A Jew thinks about when he says Shema that I'm given totally body and soul to God. That self-sacrifice that I have at the moment of Kriya Shema, that moment of devotion, colors and affects my whole day, that the whole day I should be able to serve God with this connection. Right? But the thing is that it could be that the miracle is just at the beginning of the day. The rest of the day, I don't see that level of devotion. It seems like I just do the things that make sense to me in the way that makes sense to me, right? I don't see clearly that level of devotion. Then there's a higher way, which is that I have that moment of devotion in Kriya Shema, but you can see in my actions throughout the day that I have that level of devotion. When I serve God in tying my shoes, even that has a certain air, has a certain feeling of this is a person who is totally devoted to God. Right? That is like the miracle of Eichus, that the miracle, that you can see the miracle all the time, even though it only occurs before. It occurs when God changes the nature of the oil. The highest level, says the Rebbe, is the level when the miracle and nature become totally indistinct. In other words, there is every moment, everything I do, from the smallest thing to the greatest thing, is done with the exact same amount of devotion to Hashem. In other words, my nature is my miracle. Right? My worship of God according to what makes sense to me, the only reason I do that, and it's obvious, you can see it when I do it, the only reason I'm doing this thing that makes sense to me is because God says you should do this thing that makes sense to you. In other words, there's no distinction. Everything is because God says. Everything is with this level of devotion. Right? This is the level of devotion, of Mesiras Nefesh, that everything you do should be totally selfless and without any sense of your own needs, and total devotion to God. This is the service of Hashem that's needed in the time of the greatest darkness. In the time of the greatest darkness, in the time when Antiochus is killing Jews for not bowing down to idols, right? What type of devotion to God do you need? If the Maccabees had the devotion to God, right, that they weren't going to fight the war, they weren't going to endanger their lives, right, everything would have been lost, even though that may have been what the Torah told them to do. In other words, the Maccabees had a illogical devotion to God. The Maccabees said that we are not giving an inch. We don't care that we can live in the mountains and live in the caves and worship God in the way that makes sense to us, and we don't have our lives on the line, right? If we do that, then what have we sacrificed? We've sacrificed everything. We are not going to do things. We're not going to hide. We're not going to do things in a way where we're always on the run from Antiochus. We're not going to give an inch. We're going to stand up and we're going to fight for every single aspect of Judaism until there's no Greeks left in the land. That's the until their army has been pushed back out of our borders entirely. Even though the Torah does not say I can risk my life to do that, I'm going to do it anyway. I can't give one more inch. My nature is my miracle. right? There is no regular way of things. There is no logical Jewish life when Antiochus is killing Jews for not worshiping idols, right? There is no retreating to the hills and living a regular Jewish life, right? The regular Jewish life is to go and fight Antiochus, right? Illogically, without the permission of the Torah, in a nonsensical way, right? And then, is it really any surprise then? Is it really any surprise that when they come to the Beis HaMikdash and they take all the idols out and they find all the oil, right? They insist on lighting only with pure oil, right? Is it really any surprise? That was the whole war in the first place. The whole war in the first place was there's no Torah reason to do this. There's no justification for this whatsoever, right? But we cannot sit by and be separated from God in this way. We are going to represent God. We are going to be devoted to God, and we're going to fight this war. And when they come to light the menorah, they say that even though the impure is permitted, right? And even though the tampered oil may be pure, and even though they may not even impurified it, and even though we're going to have to work and find a way to make a wooden menorah and attach it to the ground, right? And even though it may be that the non-Jews don't even impurify it at all, right? None of those, even those, moved the Maccabees even for a moment, because the whole point was not to use your head. The whole point was not to reckon with all of the problems that you face, right? And all of the doubts of whether this is even the right thing to do. They had no doubts whatsoever. Right? They weren't. The Maccabees' whole approach was not to think logically about what has to be done, but to do what a Jew needs to do. And that was their approach to lighting the menorah. That was why they searched for the pure oil. That's why they lit the pure oil. And that's why God made a miracle for them that the oil should burn and not burn at the same time. Because the miracle was the exact same thing that the Maccabees had done. Right? The Maccabees said, for us, there's no difference between nature and miracle. Give me God. And God said, if to you there's no difference between nature and miracle, then to me there's no difference between nature and miracle either. The Tzemach Tzedek said, right, it makes sense because it doesn't make sense, right? The Tzemach Tzedek once said, I once heard it said in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek, I've never seen it written anywhere, but I heard someone say once in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek, that God gave the Jewish people 3 holidays in exile. 3 holidays in exile. The 3 holidays are Chanukah, Purim, and Yutas Kislev, right? The holiday of Chassidus. And each one of these holidays is a redemption. Each one of these holidays is a geula. Purim was the redemption of the Jewish people. Chanukah was a redemption of the Torah. And Yutas Kislev was a redemption of God. We'll worry about Yutas Kislev a different time. It's after Yutas Kislev already. Why is Chanukah in the Vart the redemption of the Torah? Why is it a redemption of the Torah? Right? Because the whole idea of Chanukah was that the Greeks were okay with the Torah as long as the Torah remained a logical, sensical thing. Right? And this was really the challenge of exile. This was the challenge of exile. The challenge of exile was that the Jews no longer lived a cloistered existence only as their own people with themselves, right? The Jews were exposed to the world. This was 2,000 years ago. It hasn't stopped, right? It's the same story. It's Chanukah was a to be continued. The to be continued went through the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, unfortunately, and beyond for thousands of years, right? The story of Chanukah is not over. And the whole story is, right, that the Torah is now no longer, it's very nice that the Jews say that the Torah is from God and is unique, but look at all these nations with all of their own ideas. Look at all these idols, right? Look at all these different things you can worship. Look at the beauty of the Greek art, right, and the depth of the Greek philosophy. And the Greeks come and say, we even like your Torah. Your Torah can be part of our system. Right? Your Torah has nice wisdom. We also have nice wisdom. Come, have your Torah be part of our system. They're pluralistic, right? They love the Jews, right? If the Jews were willing to see beauty, if the Maccabees are willing to see reason, right? See who's the more powerful army. See who has the more beautiful culture. See who has the deeper philosophy, right? That's what they told the Jews. Be reasonable, right? You want to perfect yourself. You want to become a more perfect person. So perfect your body and be in our games, right? Perfect your mind and study our philosophy, right? And be a perfect person. Be better than what you have. And your culture can be integrated into that. You don't have to give up your Torah and your customs and all that. Have your nice customs. Have your Torah. Your Torah will be great wisdom. It's good to be wise, right? And your customs will be rituals. It's good to have rituals. And be part of our system, right? That's fundamentally what Greek culture said to Jewish culture in the story of Chanukah, right? And what did the Maccabees do? The Maccabees said that fundamentally, and they set the tone for exile, and it's been the same for thousands of years, right? The Maccabees said that fundamentally, it's not about making sense. It's not about being logical. It's not about having the bigger army. It's not about having the prettier body. It's not about having the wiser mind. It's not about having the nicer customs, right? This is about God. Right? And they did it even though the Torah itself says that you don't have to fight against them. Right? So what did the Maccabees do? The Maccabees taught the Torah something new. The Maccabees showed the Torah itself that you are not a book of logic, you're not a book of wisdom, you're not a book of philosophy to be studied on the shelf next to all the other philosophies of the world that the Greek Empire had encountered, right? You are something different, lahavdil. The Torah is sacred. The Torah is holy. The Torah is the Torah is nonsensical in the best sense of the term, right? Not nonsensical, that's the opposite of wisdom. Nonsensical, that's beyond wisdom, right? The Torah cannot be justified. There's a jar of oil that cannot be impurified, right? Oil is chachma in Kabbalah, right? There's a jar of oil that cannot be impurified, that cannot be contextualized by the Greek. The world cannot tell us what our Torah means ultimately. There will always be a part of it that cannot be contextualized, that cannot be understood in any worldly way. Right? That will be a logical contradiction. There will be a miracle, that the miracle of the Maccabees and the miracle of the oil, which was the same miracle as I just explained to you, the Jews will demonstrate that there is something which the earthly wisdom says cannot exist, which is a contradiction. Which is essentially what the Maccabees did. The Maccabees were a contradiction because they were totally, even though they saw that the Greeks were greater in perfection and in might, they went to war against them anyway, beyond even the limits of the Torah. The oil showed that a contradiction is possible because it burned and was not consumed at the same time. And through the holiday of Chanukah, the Torah was given this dimension, right, that it can survive and shine in any darkness. Right? That there is no darkness, there is no context, no depth of depravity, there is no denial of God that is so powerful that the Torah cannot shine a light there. And that was not true before what the Maccabees did. The Maccabees changed the nature of the Torah. The Maccabees said that the Torah is not a book that has to make sense on worldly terms. The Torah is sacred and ultimately sacred, and we write that story with our blood and with our oil, right? The story is written with both. So ultimately, Chanukah is a redemption of the Torah. They had to bend some rules of the Torah, right? The very fact that all of these questions have Torah answers, and the Rosh Hashivas can answer about it, by the way, and they can explain why Chanukah does make sense in the regular sense, meaning not in the way I'm saying, not it makes sense because it doesn't make sense, but that there's actually answers to these questions, halachic answers, is because of what the Maccabees did. The Maccabees changed everything. Their sacrifice made that the Torah is a book that obviously points in a revealed way, not just at what makes sense and at perfection, but at what is beyond worldly perfection. They returned to the Torah its connection with God. They elevated the Torah from what it was before. And that's fundamentally what we celebrate. That's the enlightenment. That's the light of Chanukah.